you wrote about. This is the stone from the story of the stone. And I found this stone, I say about 18 months ago now, through reading Liam's story, you know. Now, first of all, there's a lot of stone lifting happens in Scotland, there's a lot of stone lifting happens in Ireland. The culture is still very vibrant, it's still very alive. But the culture of stone lifting in Ireland had disappeared. It was gone, you know.
Mumbling, he left the bend, throwing away his stick. He went stooping to the stone. He staggered heavily with his stick, but he was unaware of what he was doing. His eyes were fixed, and they gleamed with the light of madness. He reached the stone and steadied himself and stood erect, looking down upon it. First, he placed his hands upon it and then paused, breathing slowly. His breath whistled with asthma, and it came out irregularly in gulps. Then he began to move his hands over the stone, slowly seeking a grip. Its surface was so round that it was hard to get a grip anywhere, except by circling its bulk with his arms. So he bent lower, reached down with his hands, but his body became so sunken with old age that his body could not cover sufficient of its bulk to enable him to get a grip. He twisted about it, growling and pawing at it, enraged at the impotence of his arms. His knees bent more and more. He began to groan. Then he knelt before it and stooped till he was touching it with his chest. He spread out his arms over it. His hands touched the ground. Then at last he could grip the stone. He pressed, and then all became still. The effort had exhausted his lungs. His tongue was sticking out. He panted for breath, and his eyes began to become covered with a glaze. He began to feel the stone against his body. Had an exciting, maddening effect on him. A big red blotch came before his eyes. His body stiffened, and a lump, like a knot, came into his throat. The veins on his forehead became big. He sucked in his lips, frowned, drew a deep breath, with a rattling sound, and heaved at the stone. It remained absolutely motionless. He fell over it loosely, with his arms thrown out limply. His chin struck the stone. His back shivered. Then he stiffened. He shook violently, from his head to foot, and rolled off the stone, falling on his left side. His legs shot out. He tried to raise his head, and dropped back over his left shoulder and remained that way, his face staring at the sky. His lower jaw dropped. A little yellow wisp of moisture oozed out over his lower lip. For a few moments, his body shuddered still, his eyes wide open, his jaw hanging. The flies began to buzz around him. Presently, he was unsettled and the yellow queen from his mouth. Another came, and the two flies quarreled about his mouth, buzzing violently. He lay thus for a long time, motionless. There was dead silence, except for the buzzing of the flies. Then human voices broke the stillness. People appeared, coming from over the village, shielding their eyes as they looked about searching. They stooped over her. The two men took off their caps, and the women uttered a loud wail. The man was dead. We couldn't keep him indoors this last week, said the dead man's son. The other man, a neighbour, said, there was a day where he could lift it high. Praise to God. There is nothing in all creation that's not more lasting than a man.
Wow.
Up,